This question is the sting of death is sin,
Yep.
and the strength of sin is the law. And she's asking
56.
for an explanation of this. So, Brother Randy or Jason, you want to tackle that, and then I'll hop on.
I'll take a crack
Sure.
at it. The way I always understood the verse was when it says the sting of death is sin and the strength of sin is the law. What makes the what I guess the still okay. Let me see if I can try to explain this correctly. So the sting of death is sin. All right. So I believe what this is saying is that clearly the wages of sin is death. But what makes sin so deadly is the fact that death comes as a result of it. All right. And so that sting or that fatal blow of death is when somebody sins. So when somebody actually goes outside God's law, there's a one-way ticket, pretty much, to death, right? So I think that's what the first part is actually making reference to. When it says that the strength of sin is the law, I believe it's talking about the fact that again, what makes the law what it is the fact that if somebody breaks it, um, it puts you in jeopardy, which actually leads to death as well. And so I'm trying to figure out a better way to actually explain the strength of sin portion. But I think what it's really kind of indicating the fact that um, the strength of when somebody breaks the law of God, in a sense, um, it draws people into that first part of that it's talking about the verse. So that's kind of what I get from it. Um, I think I could explain the second part better for whatever reason why I'm tongue tied, but I'll
Yeah,
figure it out.
I can give it a. I'll give it a try too. So, like right when you see this verse, it says, like, "Oh death, where is your sting? Oh grave, where is your victory?" And then it says, "The sting of death is sin." So basically, what we're getting is, death is being likened unto a scorpion, right?
Yep.
And obviously, this is just a killer scorpion because he's trying to kill you. And that's what death is being likened to. Death is trying to destroy you. So it says the sting of death is sin, right? And
Hmm.
so basically, what a scorpion does is he uses his tail to poke you, and that's where he's killing you, right? And so, what death is using to kill you is sin. Why? Because the wages of sin is,
Death.
right? So basically, this is saying, like, look, death is trying to kill you, and how death gets you is through sin. But how is sin strengthened? And the strength of sin is the law. Well, why is the law the strength of sin? What is it about the law that makes sin so sinful? And I think Paul speaks about that in Romans chapter 7, particularly Romans chapter 7, verses 7 through 11. He says
Yep.
this:
Hmm.
"What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law. For I had not known lust, except the law had said, Thou shalt not covet. But sin, taking occasion by the commandment." Now, this is the same language, right? Sin is now taking occasion by the commandment, or sin is now being strengthened by the commandment. "Wrought in me all manner of concupiscence. For without the law, sin was dead." So if there is no law, there is no such thing as
Sin.
sin, is basically
Hmm.
what he's saying. "For I was alive without the law once, but when the
Yep.
commandment came, sin
Yep.
revived
That's
and
it.
I
And I
died."
died.
What
That's
is
That's
right.
it
it.
about the commandment that kills you?
That's it.
Well, let's keep going. "And the commandment which was ordained to life, I found to be unto death."
Yep.
Why? "For sin taking occasion by the commandment deceived
Feed
me,
me.
and by it
Sue me.
slew me.
Slow me.
Right.
Wherefore the law is holy, and the commandment holy and just and good. Was then that which was good made death unto me? God forbid. But sin, that it might appear sin,
Yep.
working death in me by that which is good,
Yep.
that sin by the commandment might
Might be.
become exceeding sinful."
Yep.
So let me explain this in like simple terms. It's because of the law
Law.
of God why we deserve to die. Because the law of God tells us you commit adultery,
Yep.
you deserve to die. You lie, you deserve to die. And so, wow, that commandment is the reason why I deserve to die. And your conscience kicks in, and it's just like, oh man, yeah, I
Yeah,
deserve
that's
to be
it.
dead. And so, yeah, that's why the strength of sin is the law, because the law tells
Right.
you
The
you're
fact that you sin.
exceedingly sinful, and it's basically telling on you.
You
Like, think
deserve to
about
die.
it. Like, you remember when we were in school back in
Big
the day, and the
tattletale.
teacher, you're right, the teacher made a hall monitor, and it was like if that hall monitor wasn't there, or if that class monitor wasn't there, I could do whatever I want in class.
I never
But
had
when
that.
that whole monitor is there, teacher, Jason did this in class. He deserves the punishment. And yeah, that's pretty
Yeah,
much what the law is doing.
Romans
It
7,
tells you why you
7. I
deserve to
think
die.
when you read the 7, that I had not known sin but by the law. That's the strength of it. The fact that
Yeah.
a
Right.
law is known, and that the fact that a law is in place, right? It gives more strength to the fact that if somebody actually does break it, it highlights it even more, right? And the fact that that is highlighted, it now leads to the results that come as a result of the breaking of that. So you explained it 10 times better as you always do. That's why I appreciate you, brother.
We should have highlighted. We should have put him on the big screen, right?
Oh, mercy.
Nah, it was excellent. That's just a fact. It's a
You did
lonely
good.
guy.
No,
Excellent.
I'll throw some 2 cents in there. Stu, I hope this is helping you a bit with your question. It was a really good question, and an important question to answer. I'm gonna highlight it again. To add to what he said, basically the conclusion is: how is the law? How is it that the strength of sin is the law? Because the law reveals sin and tells you you're wrong and basically condemns you if you don't keep it. That's basically it, right? By the law is the knowledge of sin. Go to Romans chapter 3, real quick, verse 20.
Yep.
Romans chapter 3, verse 20.
Yep.
Notice what it says here. It says, therefore, by the deeds of the law, there shall no flesh be justified in his sight. Why? For by the law is the knowledge of sin. Sin. And sin, when it is finished, bringeth forth,
Death.
help me out here,
Death.
death, right? So, how is the strength of sin the law? Because it reveals because the law reveals sin and sin brings death. Go to Psalms chapter 119 real quick. This is going to add to this even more. Psalm 119, verse 86. And notice this. Notice what it says in Psalm 119, verse 86. All thy commandments are faithful. Why are they faithful, though? They persecute me wrongly. Wow. And then he says, help me, right? Then he says in verse 87, they had almost consumed me upon the earth. Look at what the law is doing. Because it reveals your sin, it reveals where you are, it reveals that you're worthy of death because you're not keeping it, you're violating it. And so, therefore, the strength of sin receives its strength in our hearts, in our minds, because by the law, because the law tells us we have it, and therefore we got to die. But then notice that that doesn't mean you can break it. Because then he says, but I forsook not thy precepts. Quicken me after thy loving kindness, so shall I keep the testimony. That's the word used for the Ten Commandments, the testimony of thy mouth. So just because the strength of sin is the law, since the law reveals sin, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to keep it, that there's something wrong with it. On the contrary, that's supposed to motivate you even more to live according to God's commandments. As a matter of fact, I'll share one more verse. Go back to First Corinthians now. But watch this. The verse that we're looking at was chapter 15, but go to chapter 7 in First Corinthians chapter 7. Notice what it says in verse 19. So people will read that verse and conclude something negative about the law when Paul is not talking negative about the law, but positive in the same letter. He says circumcision is nothing and uncircumcision is nothing, but what matters? What counts? Help me
Keep the
out.
commandments of God.
Keep the keeping of the commandments of God.
Keeping
I think we
of
should
the
do this one in
commandments
New King
of
James
God.
Version. I'll give you this one in a New King James Version. So. only this one though.
Only this one, right? Gotcha.
Yeah.
The keeping of the commandments of God. And some people like to argue, oh, that's not the Ten Commandments. But contextually, Paul's giving lots of marital advice. And he says in verse 2, Nevertheless, because of sexual immorality, let each man have his own wife. So he's referring to, he's speaking in context of ways within marriage to avoid violating the seventh commandment, sexual immorality. Um, so I hope did this answer your question. And if anybody else and you have any questions on this or any other questions, go ahead and post them. But I think that was a really good question. It's a verse that seems to confuse a lot of people, but when read in the context of the letter and with what Paul also wrote to the Romans and this text in Psalms, you see clearly that what's being said is that the law reveals sin, and sin, when it is finished, brings forth death.